Okay, so you want to own a Roman wine shop. In 1877, a farmer near Isernia in central Italy dug up a stone. It was a tavern bill, carved in marble. Over 1,800 years old. It lists a muleteer's tab, wine, bread, a girl, hay for his mule. The wine cost 1 ad. The girl cost 8. That single line is the whole video, actually, because the wine was never the profitable part of this business. The real constraint was this. Rome legally despised the people who sold it. Selling wine by the cup to strangers for cash was low-status work. It carried a legal stain called infamia. It never fully washed off. So how did anyone build wealth running a trade the law looked down on? Stick around. We're reconstructing the balance sheet of a business Rome needed and shamed. Here's the one force you can never route around: status friction. Call it the shame tax. It sits on every transaction you make. Every trade has a defining constraint. Butchers fight rot. Bankers fight usury law. Your constraint isn't physical, it's social, and it's written into Roman law itself. A blacksmith can be respectable and rich at the same time. You cannot. The law and public opinion have already decided what you are. Under Roman legal tradition, running a popina or capona could mark you with infamia. Infamia stripped away real legal rights. You could lose standing to represent others in court. You could lose the right to certain forms of public testimony. A senator's son could own vineyard. He could never stand behind your counter. So the smith reinvests his profits into respectability, land, status, a public career. You can't do that. Your profits stay trapped inside a trade Rome refuses to honor. There's a gap between what you earn and what you're allowed to become. That gap is the whole game. Every decision in this business exists to manage that gap. Let's see what it actually costs to enter it. Forget the modern picture of a shop with a sign and a lease. That's not what you're buying. Here's what ownership actually means. First, standing. You're very likely a freedman, not a free-born citizen. Your legal capacity to trade probably comes from a peculium. That's capital granted by a former master. That relationship never fully ends. Your patron can still claim obligations from you. He can call in favors. He can, in some cases, reclaim part of your estate. Call this your first cost. Years of enslaved labor, paid in advance, unwritten. There's no invoice for it. It simply sits behind everything you own. Second, the premises. Picture an L-shaped masonry counter facing the street. Set into it. Large clay jars called dolia, holding wine and grain. No dining room, no kitchen in the modern sense. Maybe a back room. That back room does triple duty: storage, sleeping space, occasionally a brothel. Most tabernae like yours were carved from the ground floor of someone else's building. You don't own the walls. You lease them from an elite landlord upstairs. Third, working capital. Your wine is not a shelf-stable asset sitting quietly. It sours in the heat. It's taxed on every leg of transport. It's watched constantly by aedles, the magistrates who policed adulteration and fraud. It behaves less like inventory and more like a liability with a countdown clock. Fourth, the cost nobody budgets for: legal exposure to your own customers. Roman praetors could hold capones strictly liable for theft on the premises. This came through an edict called the Actio de Recepto, aimed at your whole trade. If a guest's coin purse vanished, you might owe it back yourself. It didn't matter whether your staff actually took it or not. That's not a rare lawsuit risk. That's baked into the law governing your trade. There was also the matter of your collegium, if your city had one. Wine merchants and tavern keepers in some cities organized into trade association. Membership wasn't always required by law, but it helped with disputes, funerals, and supply. It also cost dues, paid whether business was good or bad that month. Added up, debt to a patron, a leased counter, spoiling stock, legal exposure. None of that shows up as a single price tag anyone could quote you. Verdict: this was never a business for the cautious or the low-capital citizen. Entry itself was the filter. The counter was the easy part. Standing wasn't. Let's build a plausible day using real Roman wage and price data. Under Diocletian's price edict of 301 AD, wine ran a few denarii per sextarius. A sextarius is about half a liter. Call it 1 solid cup per customer. Say your popina serves 150 cups on a decent day. Call it 150 sextarii. At a rough 2 denarii a cup, that's 300 denarii in gross wine sales. Add food, bread, olives, a simple stew. Say another 150 denarii across the day. Gross for the day, 450 denarii. That already sounds like real money. For comparison, an ordinary Roman laborer earned about 25 denarii a day. That's under that same edict. Your gross alone looks like 18 days of an unskilled man's wages. Now, subtract, one line at a time, the way the coin actually moved. First, the wine itself. You didn't grow it. You bought it wholesale, up front. Wholesale cost, plus transport, by cart or river barge, eats roughly a third of that. Spoilage and pilferage take more. A sour batch, a skimmed jar, a careless slave. Next, your rent. Most tabernae were leased from elite landlords who owned the block. That rent is due whether you sold 150 cups or 15 that day. Add dues if you belonged to a collegium, a trade association with its own costs. Add fine for watering the wine too much or serving past curfew. Add the occasional bribe to an aedial, unrecorded but common enough to expect. By the end, your 450 gross denarii might net you 60, maybe 90. That's roughly 2 to 4 days' pay for an ordinary laborer, not 18. One important caveat here: no complete ledger survives for a single Roman popina. This is a reconstruction from wage and price data, not a documented account book. The shape of it is probably right. The exact number is a guess dressed as an estimate. Notice what happened to that impressive 450 denarii along the way. It passed through a wine wholesaler, a transporter, a landlord, and a magistrate's palm. By the time it reached you, it had already been divided 4 separate ways. You were never really selling wine to a customer for 450 denarii. You were collecting a small toll on a supply chain that ran straight through you. Now staffing, and here you have 2 very different cost curves. Option 1, family labor, or an enslaved household, doing the work unpaid. It's cheap on paper, it's actually invisible, which flatters your apparent margin. A wife pours the wine, a slave hauls the amphorae. None of that shows up as a wage in any accounting you'd keep. Option 2, hired free labor, paid at market rate for skilled work. Under Diocletian's edict, a general laborer earned around 25 denarii a day with food. A skilled cook could run 40 to 50 denarii a day for the same shift. Hire 2 skilled staff for a year and you've spent a serious sum. Compare that to buying a mule outright or a full stock of amphorae. 1 year of skilled wages can outprice the physical tools of your entire trade. Here's the counterintuitive part. Scaling up doesn't lower your cost per cup. A bigger popina needs more staff, more watched jars, more exposure to fine. The status friction from Section 2 doesn't ease as you grow. It compounds instead. More visibility means more inspection. More inspection means more chances to be fined. A small stall can slip past an ideal's notice most weeks. A busy corner popina, full every night, cannot slip past anyone for long. So why would anyone grow this business past a single, quiet counter? Let's find out where the real incentive was actually hiding. Here's the twist. The wine was never the real product. Wine was visible. Visible things get taxed, capped, and inspected by aediles. Emperors personally intervened in what popinae could even sell to customers. Tiberius, early in his reign, ordered restrictions on the food served in these shops. Later emperors picked at the same thread, on and off, for generations. A business that visible cannot be where the real money quietly lives. The real profit sat in the things happening around the counter, not at it. Gambling with dice, technically illegal, ran constantly inside these establishments anyway. Sex work, tied loosely to the staff, generated income the wine alone never could. And informal credit turned your counter into a bank. A tab here, a held deposit there. Remember that muleteer's bill from Isernia? The girl cost 8 times the wine. That ratio is the entire secret of this trade, sitting in plain sight. Romans had no single catchy brand name for this hidden economy, but everyone who used a popina understood exactly what it really offered. Juvenal, writing under Trajan, describes popinae as full of thieves, sailors, and work. He wasn't really describing a wine bar, he was describing a whole shadow economy. Let's walk through it mechanically, the way a tavern keeper actually ran it. A traveling merchant enters your popina near a city gate at dusk. He orders wine, openly, on the book. That transaction is clean and taxable. Then he asks you to hold 3 days' worth of coin for safekeeping. You agree informally, no contract, just trust and your growing local reputation. He returns in 3 days, and you hand back most of it, minus a fee. That fee is never called interest. It's called a gift, a courtesy, a favor. Rome's formal laws against usury targeted structured loans between citizens of standing. An informal favor between a traveler and a shopkeeper slipped past that framework entirely. No contract meant no interest rate to inspect and no interest rate to punish. Meanwhile, the dice game in the corner runs all night. Technically against the law, you don't have to play. You simply provide the space, the light, and the wine. The house doesn't need to win a single game to profit from it. It profits from every extra cup sold to men who stay to keep playing. And the back room, rented out quietly by the hour, adds still more income. None of this ever appears on any tax record an aedile would see. Everyone understood what these back rooms were really used for. The form just stayed technically clean on the surface, and that was enough. That's the whole mechanism. Keep the visible product boring and hide the margin behind it. The wine was the receipt. The room behind it was the business. Rome didn't ignore this trade. It struck a bargain with it instead. You got a form of tolerated existence. The state rarely shut down individual popinae. In exchange, you accepted real constraints. Curfews, food limits, inspection by aediles. Emperors reserved the right to intervene whenever the trade grew inconvenient for them. Here's the anecdote that proves it, on an empire-wide scale. In 92 AD, Emperor Domitian issued an edict targeting wine itself. Vesuvius had destroyed Pompeii's vineyards in 79 AD, and wine prices had spiked hard. Farmers across Italy planted vines instead of grain, chasing the higher profit margin. Grain supply for the growing capital started to look genuinely fragile. Domitian banned new vineyards in Italy outright by direct imperial edict. He ordered at least half the vineyards in the provinces uprooted by force. Gaul resisted so hard that legions were reportedly sent to enforce the order. The edict was never fully enforced, but it stayed formal law for nearly 2 centuries. That's the lesson. Your entire input market could vanish by imperial whim, overnight. You weren't operating in a free market at all. You were operating inside someone else's permission slip, renewed one reign at a time. That permission could be redrawn any morning, and it had nothing to do with you. The vineyard owner upstream felt it first. You felt it a season later, in your prices. Notice who Domitian actually punished and who he actually spared. He didn't find individual popina keepers, or shut down individual counters in Rome. He went straight for the supply itself, at the vineyard, far upstream from you. That's the pattern behind this whole regulatory bargain, worth remembering. Power in the system preferred to strike at land and supply, not at small shopkeepers. It was easier to uproot vines in a province than to police every tavern. You were, in a strange way, too small and numerous to be worth targeting directly. That smallness was its own kind of protection, even if nobody planned it that way. Let's stack the risks, smallest to largest, the way you'd actually feel them. First, physical risk. Burns from hot wine, spoiled batches, a knife in the wrong hand. No insurance existed anywhere in this world for a shopkeeper like you. A bad accident was simply a bad month, absorbed alone, with no cushion. Second, economic risk. Price ceilings under edicts like Diocletian's didn't flex with your costs. If transport got pricier, your margin shrank. The ceiling above you never moved. Third, political risk. Popinae were routinely blamed for unrest, drunkenness, and petty crime. Emperors from Tiberius to Claudius periodically restricted or harassed these establishments outright. You were an easy, visible target whenever authorities wanted to look tough on vice. Fourth, and worst, systemic catastrophe, the kind no ledger survives to describe fully. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD didn't just kill people at Pompeii. It wiped out entire vineyards, wine stocks, and popinae in a single afternoon. Estimates for Pompeii and Herculaneum's combined dead run into the thousands. Wine prices spiked across Italy in the years that followed the eruption. That spike, remember, is what eventually triggered Domitian's edict 13 years later. Through all 4 risk levels, one thing never paused: your fixed costs. Rent was still due. Collegium dues were still due. Fines didn't care about your year. Revenue could vanish overnight in a riot, a fire, or a bad season. Your obligations never noticed and never once waited for you to recover. So let's reconstruct a good year and a bad year, honestly caveated throughout. A good year. Steady foot traffic, low spoilage, no fines, side income intact. Call that a surplus of roughly 2 to 4 times an ordinary laborer's annual wage. Comfortable by the standards of Rome's working poor. Not wealthy, not secure. A bad year, a bad batch, a fine, a slow season, a political crackdown. Call that near zero, or a loss quietly carried forward into debt. Again, no complete account book survives for any single popina we know of. This is shaped by wage and price data, not by a surviving ledger. So who actually got rich from wine in Rome? Rarely the popina owner. It was usually the landlord who owned the taberna and collected rent regardless. It was the elite vineyard owner, like Cato the Elder, writing profit manuals for peers. Cato calculated vineyard returns the way a modern investor models a portfolio. He never once had to stand behind a counter and pour a cup himself. It was whoever controlled land, credit, or the full supply chain, not the counter itself. The person pouring the cups took the legal risk and kept the smallest share. The person who never touched a cup took the safest share, and the largest one. That imbalance wasn't an accident. It was the entire structure working exactly as built. Think back to the freedman behind the counter, with his peculium and his patron. Even in a great year, he was still legally tethered to someone above him. The vineyard owner, the landlord, the patron. None of them carried infamia for this trade. Only the person actually pouring the wine carried that particular weight every single day. Let's go back to that stone from Isernia one more time. Wine, 1 as. Bread, 2. The girl, 8. Hay for the mule, 2. That bill wasn't really about wine. It never was. Could you get rich running a Roman wine shop? Rarely, and never cleanly. You could get by. You could occasionally do well, if luck held. But real wealth in this world sat one layer above your counter, always. You were standing on a bridge that other people used to reach their fortunes. What you were actually selling was never the cup of wine itself. It was access to credit, to a quiet room, to a night's forgetting. It was the appearance of a clean, legal, taxable transaction sitting on top. Underneath that appearance, the real business ran. Mostly unwritten, mostly unpunished. That gap between the visible sale and the real exchange, that was the true asset. It's the one thing the stone from Isernia still shows us centuries later.